Stand in a field outside Shipshewana, Indiana. No pasteurization plant, no anti-crystallization furnace, no bulk clarifier. The wooden frame that man just pulled from the hive contains 181 bioactive compounds. The jar of honey in your kitchen contains none of them. After the last video, I kept thinking about food. What God's people actually ate, not what we assume. What they pulled from the land and put in their mouths. So I started with honey. And what I found goes back not just 100 years, but 3,500 years to a medical text written before Moses reached Canaan. Before this video ends, I am going to show you exactly what raw honey is, how to identify it, and how to source it for under $15. I am also going to show you a food safety news investigation from 2011 and a USDA document from 1943 that was quietly removed from public circulation. Not banned, just erased. And I am going to tell you who erased it and why. Stay with me. Here is a number that should make you angry. Americans spend $2.1 billion on commercial honey every year. The average household buys 2 to 4 jars. And in 2011, Food Safety News tested 60 separate honey products from grocery stores, drugstores, and big box retailers across the United States. 76% of them contained 0 detectable pollen. 0. The FDA's own technical position is clear. Without pollen, honey cannot be traced, not to a country, not to a flower, not to a hive. Dr. Vaughn Bryant, a melissopollenologist at Texas A&M University, who has analyzed honey pollen profiles since 1979, reviewed those same samples. He stated that under the standard used by most countries in the world, the product could not legally be called honey. You paid $9 for a brown liquid with no verifiable biological origin. The broader sweetener market in the United States, refined sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and processed honey, is worth $34 billion annually. Every jar of raw honey bought from a local beekeeper is a jar that market never captures, a relationship that never gets built, a recurring purchase that never gets tracked. The industry calls it ultrafiltration. Commercial honey is heated above 70 degrees Celsius, 158 degrees Fahrenheit, and forced through microscopic filters under high pressure. What comes out is shelf-stable, crystal clear, and biologically simplified. It will not cloud. It will not crystallize. It will not do the one thing that 3,500 years of human history says honey does, because the mechanism has been destroyed. Here is the mechanism. A bee reduces flower nectar from 80% water content down to below 18% through fanning and enzymatic conversion. That process produces hydrogen peroxide as a natural byproduct. It concentrates methylglyoxal, a compound the Journal of Wound Care documented in 2010 as active against 60 species of bacteria, including methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Raw honey's water activity falls below 0.6. Most pathogens cannot survive below 0.91. Hold a spoonful on an open wound, and the drawing sensation you feel is water activity differential working in real time. That is not folk medicine. That is applied biology, documented, measured, and then quietly not mentioned. God's people did not read that in a laboratory report. They understood it the way the ancients understood everything, by watching what the earth was already doing and then building around it. Jonathan ate wild honey during battle, and his eyes were brightened. Samson found a living colony in a lion's carcass and took the honey from it. John the Baptist lived on wild honey in the Judean wilderness for months. 3,000 years of accumulated observation. 1 century of industrial processing decided you did not need to know what they knew. But here is where it gets interesting. The Egyptians built the first documented honey medical system 3,500 years ago. The Ebers Papyrus, dated to 1550 BC and recovered from a tomb near Luxor, contains 147 separate prescriptions using honey, wound dressings, anti-inflammatory preparations, digestive treatments. The Egyptians were not guessing. They were standardizing a system that had already been in use for generations before the document was written. The Greeks refined it. Hippocrates documented hydromel, honey mixed with water, in the 5th century BC for fever reduction, wound irrigation, and respiratory conditions. Dioscorides, writing from Rome in 77 AD during the reign of Nero, published the first systematic pharmacology of honey in De Materia Medica. He described honey as cleansing to open wounds, softening to inflamed tissues, and stabilizing to digestion. His text remained a primary medical reference for 1,500 years. I pulled the English translation of Dioscorides and went through the honey entries one by one. There are 11 of them. Not one recommends heat. In 2007, archaeologists from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem published findings from Tel Rehov in northern Israel. They had excavated a commercial-scale apiary dating to the 10th and 9th centuries BC. 30 ceramic hive cylinders. The era of Solomon and Elijah. That apiary could house nearly 1 million bees and produce hundreds of kilograms of honey per year. This was organized, economically significant industry 3,000 years ago in a region the Bible describes as flowing with milk and honey. In 215 AD, the Bishop Hippolytus in Rome documented the baptismal rite of the early church. After the Eucharist, newly baptized Christians received 3 cups. The second was milk mixed with honey, a direct enactment of the covenant promise, a tangible crossing into the promised land. Tertullian documented the same practice in 211 AD from Carthage in North Africa. That rite ran for at least 2 centuries before fading from cultural drift. Honey as a covenantal sign was no longer explained, and so it was no longer practiced. Then, in 1865, a mechanic named Franz Hruschka in Vienna developed the first centrifugal honey extractor. That tool reached American beekeepers through advocates like Moses Quinby of St. Johnsville, New York, by the early 1870s. That was not the problem. The extractor was efficient. It preserved the comb. The problem arrived in 1905, when commercial operations began heating honey above 65 degrees Celsius to prevent crystallization during long-distance transport. By 1940, industrial pasteurization between 65 and 80 degrees Celsius had become the American commercial standard. That is between 149 and 176 degrees Fahrenheit, more than twice the temperature of a working hive. In 1943, the USDA published a technical circular on cold honey extraction at hive temperature. The Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, never needed it. They never stopped doing it the original way. But for the broader American market, that document disappeared from federal circulation before 2001. Not banned, not disproven, just removed. Then in 2006, something happened that explains why. It was not an accident. The U.S. honey market is worth $2.1 billion per year. The broader sweetener category is worth $34 billion. Every jar of raw honey from a local beekeeper is a jar the commercial network never touches, a relationship that never gets built, a contract that never gets signed. In 2006, the National Honey Board, a USDA-overseen commodity board funded by honey producers and importers, spent $3.4 million on marketing and promotion. There was no binding federal standard requiring commercial honey to contain pollen. In 2009, the FDA was formally petitioned to establish a legal standard of identity for honey, requiring pollen for traceability. I pulled the Federal Register response. The agency declined. Their stated reason was insufficient public health justification. They declined while their own import alert records documented Chinese honey adulterated with chloramphenicol, an antibiotic banned from the U.S. food supply, entering American distribution channels. When Food Safety News published its 2011 investigation, 100% of honey from drugstore chains contained zero pollen. 77% from major retail chains contained zero pollen. Zero pollen across much of the mainstream market. Under European Union Council Directive 2001-110-EC, adopted in 2001 and still active, honey sold in 27 member countries must contain sufficient pollen to establish botanical and geographical origin. 27 countries have had that standard for 23 years. Your grocer has never mentioned it because the FDA never adopted it. Germany's national beekeeping organization, the Deutsches Imkerverband, has tracked pollen profiles and extraction practices across certified producers for decades. Not experiments. Proven, documented infrastructure. Your building inspector has never heard of it because his training manual never mentioned it. Now, if you are thinking this only applies to people with land, with beehives, with farms in Lancaster County, stay with me. This next part is specifically for you. You do not need a hive. You do not need a farm. Even if you live in a city apartment, even if you have never bought anything that did not come from a chain grocery store, even if the closest working farm to your zip code is 40 miles away, this is for you. You need two things: a farmer's market and the ability to read a label. USD. A National Farmers Market Directory lists 8,600 active markets as of 2023. At least 60% carry local honey. A 12-ounce jar of raw honey from a beekeeper costs between $12 and $18. A single-use application of medical-grade Manuka wound dressing at the same methylglyoxal concentration costs between $8 and $15. Same compound. 1/100th of the price. Saturday morning. Here is exactly what you do. You look at the label for 3 words: raw, unfiltered, unpasteurized. Any 2 of the 3. A jar that says only pure honey or 100% natural honey tells you nothing. Those terms have no legal definition in the United States. You hold the jar to light. Raw honey is cloudy. It contains pollen particles, propolis fragments, and fine air bubbles. If you can read the label on the other side of the jar through the honey, it has been processed. You buy combed honey when you can find it. Honey still in its beeswax comb has never been extracted, heated, or filtered. It is the form Jonathan found in 1 Samuel chapter 14. It is the form John the Baptist gathered in the Judean wilderness. Eat the comb and all. Beeswax is digestible, and it contains propolis, one of the strongest antimicrobial compounds the hive produces. You source from a local beekeeper within 50 miles. Ask one question: do you heat the honey during extraction? A responsible small-scale beekeeper almost never does. Warning: do not buy raw honey from an online bulk retailer without pollen certification. A 2008 U.S. Customs and Border Protection investigation documented the seizure of more than 2 million pounds of adulterated imported honey in a single quarter. The man who brings his frames to the market in Shipshewana has run 47 hives for 22 years. His extraction temperature has never exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit. His honey crystallizes in the jar within 6 weeks. He does not call that a defect. He calls it proof. Before I show you the one variant that even most raw honey advocates do not know about, if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what comes next is the part the commercial honey industry has spent decades making sure you never find. Here is the honesty. Not all raw honey behaves the same. In dry continental climates like Ohio, Pennsylvania, and the Midwest, raw honey from clover or wildflower sources crystallizes within 4 to 8 weeks. Set the jar in water at 95 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes. Done. In high humidity southern climates such as Georgia, Louisiana, and coastal Florida, raw honey without moisture control can ferment if the beekeeper harvested before the comb was fully capped. Fermentation is the single failure mode of raw honey. For those climates, there is a smarter variant. Instead of liquid raw honey, you buy creamed honey. It is also called whipped or spun honey. Creamed honey is raw honey induced to crystallize in a controlled, fine-grained structure by seeding it with already crystallized honey at a 1:10 ratio and holding it at exactly 57 degrees Fahrenheit for 72 hours. The result is solid at room temperature. It cannot ferment. It contains the same 181 bioactive compounds as liquid raw honey, no heat above 57 degrees, no filtration, no risk of fermentation in any climate. This method was developed and standardized by Dyce at Cornell University in 1935. His protocol was published in the Cornell University Agricultural Experiment Station Bulletin. He never patented it. A candy thermometer and a cold pantry are sufficient. The Dyce method never disappeared in Amish communities. In Shipshewana, Indiana, creamed honey has been produced using this method continuously since the 1940s. It qualifies under every state cottage food law that covers raw honey. It ships without leaking. It stores without refrigeration. Now here is the one most people miss. Buckwheat honey. Dark, sharp, almost bitter. Commercial operations do not carry it because the flavor does not match the consumer preference built by 80 years of processed clover honey marketing. But a 2007 study at Penn State College of Medicine, published in Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine, led author Dr. Ian Paul, tested 105 children across 3 groups for nighttime cough relief. Buckwheat honey. Dextromethorphan, the active ingredient in most commercial cough medicines. And nothing. Buckwheat honey outperformed dextromethorphan on every single outcome measure. That study has been in the published literature since December 2007. Not banned, just never mentioned by anyone with a financial interest in the alternative. Ask for buckwheat honey by name at the same market where you found the crystallized clover. You will find it within 3 markets. It will cost $2 to $4 more per jar. Ask for it anyway. The Egyptians built the first documented honey-based medical system in 1550 BC. The Greeks codified it into formal pharmacology. The Romans traded premium honey by origin, Attic from Athens, Hyblaean from Sicily, Pontic from the Black Sea, the way we trade premium olive oil today, as a known, traceable, valued natural product. The Israelites maintained commercial apiaries in the 10th century BC. Every civilization that confronted infection, inflammation, and chronic wound care arrived at the same answer, independently. The hive was not a metaphor, it was infrastructure. Then, in 1905, commercial heating changed what honey meant in America. In 1940, pasteurization above 149 degrees Fahrenheit became the commercial standard. In 2006, the National Honey Board spent $3.4 million promoting a product that 76% of the time contained 0 verifiable pollen. In 2009, the FDA declined to legally define honey as containing pollen. In 2011, Food Safety News documented the result. 5 years, 5 decisions, 3,500 years of accumulated knowledge became invisible in a grocery store aisle. The methylglyoxal in raw honey does not care about a federal labeling petition. The hydrogen peroxide does not care about a commodity board's marketing budget. The water activity below 0.6 does not care about an industrial standard written by people with a financial interest in not measuring it. The physics is the physics. It has always been the physics. It kept wounds clean before the first antibiotic existed. It has always kept wounds clean, and it will keep wounds clean long after every ultrafiltration plant ever built has rusted into nothing. God's people did not lose this knowledge. It was not banned. It was not disproven. It was slowly and deliberately removed from the shelf beside you, one processing standard at a time, by a market worth $34 billion that had no interest in you knowing what a $14 jar of comb honey could do. Now you have it. Drop your state in the comments. Tell me what a jar of store honey costs you right now. I want to build a map across this country, state by state, of what people are paying for something that cannot legally be called honey in 27 countries. And if your grandfather ever kept bees, even one hive, even one season, I want to hear about it. Because what he knew and what I just showed you are the same physics. They just called it something different. If you're the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe. When the next one is ready, you will be the first to know.